Imagine dedicating 30 years of your life to a single, impossible moment. That was Elena Vasquez's reality. Peering out the window of her small cabin aboard the diplomatic ship Aurora, she watched the cosmos drift by. Today, after a lifetime of clawing her way up Earth's diplomatic core, was the day. After an endless grind of treaties, negotiations, and sleepless nights, she'd been handed the most critical mission in human history. Today, humanity would formally ask to join the Galactic Council. Elena was 52 years old. Her dark hair was threaded with silver, and laugh lines now framed eyes that had seen far too much over the last decade. But her mind was a razor's edge. Her will was forged steel, and her faith in humanity's destiny among the stars was unshakable. She'd spent 6 grueling months preparing for this single moment, studying the intricate customs of 412 alien species. She had trade statistics, scientific breakthroughs, and cultural histories memorized, and she'd practiced her speech so many times she could deliver it in her sleep. Earth had earned its spot at the galactic table, and by God, Elena was going to get it for them. The Aurora's captain, a stoic man named David Chen, appeared at her doorway. His expression was serious, but calm. He'd served alongside Elena for 15 years, and his trust in her was absolute. "We're approaching the council station, Ambassador," he said simply. "Docking in 2 hours." Elena gave a firm nod. "Thank you, Captain. I'll be ready." She turned back to the star-dusted view. Out there, somewhere in that glittering expanse, was the heart of galactic power. The council station had orbited that spot for 11,000 years, a silent monument older than human civilization, older than the pyramids, older than the very idea of a city. And today, Elena Vasquez, representing a species of cosmic toddlers, would walk into its hallowed chambers and demand a place in history. Taking a steadying breath, she began to prepare. The sheer scale of the council station was breathtaking. Elena had seen the holograms, but they were a pale imitation of the real thing. The station was a city-sized jewel hanging in space, a miniature moon of crystalline spires that drank the light of a man-made sun. Hundreds of alien ships swarmed around it like metallic insects drawn to a flower. The Aurora looked like a child's toy next to most of them. Human technology was still laughably primitive by galactic standards. While other species could bend space to their will, humans were still using fusion drives. While they had shields that could phase through solid objects, humanity's were just basic energy fields. We were babies learning to crawl while the rest of the galaxy was running marathons. But every race had to start somewhere. Elena moved through docking procedures smoothly, her words guided by a tiny translation device tucked behind her ear. It was a gift from the Minari, a friendly species humanity had been trading with for about 40 years. Thanks to it, she could understand any language spoken to her, and they could understand her. The station's interior was an even greater shock to the senses. The corridors were vast enough to fit creatures of every imaginable size, from tiny, sparkling beings that could sit in her palm to colossal beasts that could have swallowed her ship without a second thought. The walls themselves seemed alive, shimmering with colors that reflected the emotions of the beings nearby. The very air was a perfectly engineered cocktail designed to support dozens of different life forms at once. Elena's escort was a silent silver robot that glided ahead of her. It led her down winding hallways, past bustling markets, and through gardens filled with impossible plants from 1,000 different worlds. She spotted species she recognized from her studies. The Vorthani, giant floating jellyfish who spoke in shifting colors. The Kali, beings of pure energy contained within elegant crystal shells. And the insect-like Zilvari, whose high arbiter was the ultimate authority on the council. But for everyone she knew, she saw a dozen she didn't. There were creatures made of what looked like living fire, beings of solid ice, and things so bizarre and outside her understanding that her brain struggled to even categorize them. And every single one of them stopped and stared as she passed. Elena kept her chin up, her face a mask of calm. She was the voice of 8 billion human souls. She would not show an ounce of fear. The grand chamber was a spectacle of light and crystal. Its ceiling soared so high it vanished into a soft, ethereal glow, and its walls were terraced with thousands upon thousands of seats, climbing endlessly upward. Representatives from all 412 species were present, a dizzying mosaic of shapes, colors, and textures. At the very center of it all, on a raised platform, sat the High Council. These were the 5 beings from the most ancient and powerful races in the galaxy, the ones who had steered galactic law for millennia. Their judgment was final. In the center seat was High Arbiter Zilvex, a Zilvari who had held his post for over 300 years. His insectoid body was draped in ceremonial metals that flashed in the ambient light. His huge compound eyes captured her reflection 1,000 times over as she walked to the petitioner's podium. The podium was nothing more than a simple bare platform in the middle of the immense chamber. As was human tradition for such a momentous occasion, Elena walked to it alone, one person to speak for all. She reached the center and stood, waiting. A profound silence fell over the chamber. Thousands of beings, representing 412 worlds, had their eyes fixed on a single human woman. High Arbiter Zilvex's voice resonated through the space, instantly translated by her implant. The Galactic Council recognizes the representative from the planet designated Earth, third from the star Sol, in the Orion Arm. State your name and your purpose. Elena inhaled slowly. I am Ambassador Elena Vasquez, representing the United Earth Confederacy. I come before this esteemed council to formally petition for associate membership for humanity in the Galactic Council. A low murmur rippled through the vast chamber. Elena had anticipated this. Asking for associate membership was a bold move for a species as young as humanity, but she knew they were ready. The council acknowledges Earth's petition, Zilvex said. You may present your case. Elena tapped her wrist, and a holographic display bloomed in the air around her, showing a beautiful, swirling blue orb. Humanity has been a spacefaring species for a mere 63 years, she began. In that short time, we have established colonies on 3 worlds. We've developed faster-than-light travel, artificial gravity, and medical sciences that have extended our lifespans by 30 years. The images shifted, showing human scientists collaborating with aliens, our ships laden with trade goods, our diplomats shaking hands with beings of a dozen different forms. We have built peaceful trade relationships with 47 species. We have contributed to vital research in fields from quantum physics to xenobiology. We have shared our art, our music, and our stories with the galaxy, and we have enthusiastically embraced the cultures we've been privileged to encounter. The hologram changed again, now showing human soldiers fighting side by side with alien allies against pirates. We have also contributed to galactic security. Human volunteers have served in 12 different peacekeeping operations over the last 20 years. We have lost more than 1,000 of our own defending species we had only just met. Elena let the images fade, the silence hanging in the air. She looked up, meeting the gaze of the thousands of watching eyes. We are young. We are fully aware of this. We are still learning, still growing, and still finding our place in this vast cosmos. But we believe our youth is our greatest strength, not a weakness. We offer fresh eyes, new ideas, and a different way of looking at the universe that can benefit this entire community. Her voice grew stronger, ringing with conviction. Humanity is not asking for a handout. We are asking for a partnership. We ask for a seat at this table, not because we feel entitled to it, but because we believe we have earned the right to have our voice heard. She inclined her head respectfully. The United Earth Confederacy formally requests associate membership in the Galactic Council. We offer our friendship, our full cooperation, and our unwavering commitment to the peace and prosperity of every species. Elena finished and fell silent. She'd made her case. The rest was up to them. High Arbiter Zilvex's compound eyes seemed to shimmer. The Council has heard Earth's petition. The floor is now open for deliberation. For a tense moment, there was only silence. Then, a voice boomed from the upper tiers. 63 years? It was the Vorthani delegate, the giant jellyfish, its body pulsing with a color her implant translated as deep amusement. These creatures have had faster-than-light travel for 63 of their planetary rotations, and they think this makes them qualified to join us? Laughter erupted. It was a bizarre symphony of clicks, whistles, shimmering colors, and magnetic pulses, but it was unmistakably ridicule. Elena felt a hot flush creep up her neck, but her face remained a stone mask. Their species still marks time by the spin of a single planet, the Vorthani continued, its voice dripping with condescension. They haven't even bothered to adopt the galactic standard calendar. The laughter grew. Another voice chimed in, the Krail delegate, a being of pure energy in a crystal prison. This is the species that nearly annihilated itself with nuclear fission, is it not? They discovered the atom and their first impulse was to build a bomb. They used it on their own cities. The laughter became a roar. They can't even govern themselves, shouted a four-armed being from the hegemony of 12 stars. Their little world is fractured into 193 competing states. They haven't achieved planetary unity. Then, a final disgusted shout from the back. They consume the flesh of other living creatures. Imagine being judged by a council of the entire galaxy, only for them to decide you're basically a joke. They called humans fragile, short-lived animals who feel pain, waste a third of their lives sleeping, and spend their free time getting sunburns. The Grand Chamber, representing 412 different species, exploded in laughter. If you think that's an injustice, stick around to see how one human's silent response changed the course of history. Standing at the podium, Elena felt the waves of ridicule wash over her, and something inside her snapped. She'd come prepared for arguments, for debates, even for rejection. But she never prepared for this. This wasn't a negotiation. It was pure, undiluted contempt for all of humanity. Her eyes scanned the sea of alien faces. A few remained silent, their expressions impossible to read, but the vast majority were howling with amusement. They looked at her and saw a pet, not a peer. The mockery continued for nearly 10 full minutes before the High Arbiter, Zilvex, raised a limb to command silence. The chamber gradually quieted down, though chuckles and snickers still echoed through the hall. The Council appreciates humanity's enthusiasm, Zilvex said, his mandibles clicking in a dry insectoid version of a laugh. It's always charming to see a young race so eager to join the adults' table. His multifaceted eyes bored into Elena. However, he continued, we have to look at the big picture. Membership requires a species to demonstrate a certain level of maturity, unity, and value. Humanity, while spirited, is simply too young, too chaotic, too primitive. He spread his upper arms in a gesture that was probably meant to be comforting, but felt deeply patronizing. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, once your people have grown up, you can try again. For now, we suggest you go back to your little corner of the galaxy and try not to blow yourselves up. His mandibles clicked one last time, and a final wave of laughter swept the room. Elena just stood there, perfectly still. She let the sound crash over her. In her 30 years as a diplomat, she'd been insulted, dismissed, and laughed at more times than she could count. But never, ever like this. In that moment, something inside her turned to ice. She had walked in here hoping for a partnership. She had genuinely believed that if she just made her case clearly enough, they would see the potential in humanity, that a shared future among the stars was possible. That dream died right there, drowned in a sea of alien laughter. As the noise finally began to fade, Elena reached up and tore the translation implant from behind her ear. The device wasn't designed for easy removal. A sharp, searing pain shot through her skull, but she didn't even flinch. She held the small piece of technology in her palm, this tiny symbol of all her species' hopes and dreams. Then, with deliberate care, she set it down on the podium. The room fell dead silent. This was not in the script. No one had ever done that before. Elena lifted her head and stared out at the collective powers of the galaxy. 412 species, 11,000 years of shared history, the wisdom of 1,000,000 worlds. And not a single one of them saw humanity as an equal. She didn't say a word. What was the point? They'd already made up their minds. No speech she could give would change their perception of humans as insignificant children. So, she offered them nothing but silence. Then, Elena Vasquez turned her back on the Galactic Council. Her footsteps echoed in the vast, silent chamber as she walked toward the exit. Her spine was straight, her head held high. She never once looked back. As the great doors hissed shut behind her, the laughter in the grand chamber was well and truly gone, replaced by a ripple of stunned confusion. In the Council's entire 11,000-year history, no one seeking membership had ever just left. They pleaded, they bargained, they got angry, they broke down in tears. They never, ever just walked away. High Arbiter Zilvex's mandibles clicked with uncertainty. "The petition is denied," he announced, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "Let's move on." But the atmosphere in the room had fundamentally changed. The next speaker found it impossible to hold the chamber's attention. Envoys whispered amongst themselves, their eyes darting to the doors where the human had vanished. It was illogical. Humanity was a galactic nobody, a blink-and-you'll-miss-it species from a single planet. They had no real power or influence to speak of, yet, as the session dragged on, delegate after delegate found their thoughts drifting back to that silent walk, that ramrod straight back, and that look of absolute chilling calm. It was unsettling. Aboard her ship, the Aurora, Elena Vasquez sat in the quiet of her cabin. They had disengaged from the station the second she was aboard and were already on the long trip home. The captain had tried to talk to her, but she just waved him off. She had to process this. The throbbing pain behind her ear was fading, replaced by the much deeper ache of utter failure. All that preparation, all that hope, all for nothing. The Council would never see them as equals, not in 1,000 years. To them, humans were just amusing little creatures, like ants building a funny-shaped hill before the rain comes to wash it all away. But as Elena stared into the endless starfield, her pain slowly began to harden into something else. She was no stranger to failure. Every diplomat knows that failure is just the tuition you pay for wisdom. And today's lesson? It was crystal clear. She replayed the laughter, the arrogance, the absolute conviction in their eyes that humanity was, and always would be, insignificant. They were so wrong. She knew what her people were capable of when they were united. She'd seen them go from horse-drawn buggies to walking on their moon in the span of a single lifetime. She'd seen them survive world wars, pandemics, and disasters that should have wiped them out. She knew their greatest strength was a stubborn, bone-deep refusal to ever give up. The Council saw humanity's youth and called it weakness. They saw their internal conflicts and called it primitive. They saw their need for sleep in their short lifespans and called it pathetic. They didn't get it. Humans weren't weak. They were resilient. They weren't primitive. They were incredibly adaptable. And they weren't pathetic. They were patient. Very patient. A new plan formed in her mind. She would go home and tell everyone exactly what happened. She would describe the mockery, the disdain, the complete and total rejection. And then she would propose a new strategy. The Council wanted humanity to develop in peaceful isolation? Perfect. They would do just that. But not in the way the Council imagined. Humanity would grow. They would get stronger. They would build a civilization that didn't need anyone's permission to exist. And someday, when the Council finally realized what a colossal mistake they'd made, humanity would be ready. They would remember this day. They would remember the laughter. Looking out at the vastness of space, Elena Vasquez finally smiled. The Council had absolutely no idea what they had just unleashed. Meanwhile, back in the Grand Chamber, hours after the session ended, High Arbiter Zilvex sat alone. The Great Hall was empty and silent. He knew he should be resting for the next day's endless cycle of petitions and disputes, but his thoughts kept circling back to the human. It was ridiculous. She was a single being from a backward world. Worthless. Most likely her species would self-destruct within a few generations, as so many upstarts did. But he couldn't shake the image of that walk, that silent, dignified exit. In his 300 years on the Council, Zilvex had seen it all. He'd seen rage and despair, dignity and fury. He had never seen a petitioner simply turn their back and leave. In those final moments, he'd seen something in the human's eyes that he couldn't place. It wasn't anger or defeat. It was something far more unnerving. It looked like patience. Zilvex made a rasping sound of dismissal. It meant nothing. The human meant nothing. In 1,000 years, this day would be completely forgotten. He pushed himself up and left the chamber, determined to put it out of his mind. But deep within his ancient consciousness, a tiny, persistent alarm had begun to sound, a warning he wouldn't understand for a very long time. In the first year following the incident, nothing changed. Humanity had never been a major player on the galactic stage. They had a few remote trading outposts, a handful of scientific exchanges, and attended the occasional summit, mostly as wallflowers. And then, just like that, they were gone. The human ships stopped docking at council ports. Their delegates vanished from interspecies conferences. The few human exchange students at alien universities packed their bags and went home without a word. Frankly, nobody really cared. Humanity was a bit player on the galactic stage. Their absence was hardly a ripple in the pond. But back on Earth, that ripple was a tidal wave. The moment Ambassador Elena Vasquez stepped off the transport from the council station, she demanded a meeting with the entire United Earth Confederacy leadership. She stood before them, her face like stone, and recounted what had happened. She told them every detail, every dismissive chuckle, every single insult. The recording of that session was broadcast on every screen on the planet. Billions of people watched as 412 alien species openly mocked their request to join the galactic community. They watched their ambassador physically remove her translator implant, the ultimate diplomatic mic drop, and walk away in stunned silence. And then, Elena Vasquez told them her plan. They expect us to just fade away, she said. They're betting we'll either blow ourselves up or spend the next 1,000 years groveling for a second chance. They think we're children who'll throw a tantrum and then come crawling back, begging for scraps. Her eyes, once warm and diplomatic, were now chips of ice. They are dead wrong. The plan was breathtakingly simple in its concept, but staggering in its ambition. Humanity would go completely dark. They would sever all ties with the galactic community. No more trade requests, no more attending useless functions, no more asking for anything from species who saw them as a joke. From now on, they would focus only on themselves. Every last resource would be poured into a single goal: advancement. They would leapfrog their technology by any means necessary. They would expand their territory, build up their strength, and forge a civilization so powerful it wouldn't need anyone's approval. And the most important part? They would do it all in absolute deafening silence. They laughed at us for measuring time by the spin of our little planet, Elena said, a grim smile on her face. Let's see how they feel after being ignored for a few of their own planet's rotations. The plan was passed without a single dissenting vote. The United Earth Confederacy beamed out one last message to every species they had ever known. It was short, professional, and chillingly polite. The United Earth Confederacy thanks its galactic partners for their cooperation over the past several decades. Due to internal restructuring, we will be reducing our external engagement for the foreseeable future. We wish all species continued peace and prosperity. That was it. No anger, no accusations, no drama, just silence. It took about 2 years for the rest of the galaxy to start getting curious. The first hint of trouble came when Delegate Minara of the Hegemony of 12 Stars was reviewing a trade report. For years, the Hegemony had a small but lucrative deal with human agricultural colonies. It turned out humans had a near magical knack for making things grow in the worst soil imaginable. Their farming techniques had saved several of the Hegemony's failing farm worlds. Well, now those worlds were failing all over again. Has anyone reached out to the humans about renewing the agricultural exchange? Minara asked her staff. We've sent 12 formal requests over the last 8 months, her aide replied, shuffling his data pad. They acknowledge receipt of the message, but that's it. Nothing more? What is that supposed to mean? It means they send back a confirmation that our message was received, sir. They just don't reply to what's in it. Minara was baffled. This wasn't how the game was played. You send a request, they send a counteroffer, you negotiate. You weren't supposed to just ignore it. Around the same time, the Vorthani hive minds ran into a similar wall. For decades, the Vorthani had quietly relied on human mathematicians for a very specific type of problem solving. The Vorthani were geniuses in most things, but their hive mind way of thinking had certain blind spots. Humans, with their messy individual brains, could spot patterns the Vorthani completely missed. It was a tiny arrangement, just a few complex equations every now and then. The humans seemed to enjoy the challenge, and the Vorthani paid them with interesting bits of tech. But now, the equations were piling up, unsolved. Vorthani deep space navigation systems, which relied on those calculations, started developing glitches. Starships started showing up late. Entire shipping schedules fell apart. What started as a tiny annoyance snowballed into a massive logistical nightmare. "Contact the humans," the Vorthani Council ordered. "Offer them anything they want." The message went out. An acknowledgement of receipt came back. And then, nothing. By year 5, the human silence was a hot topic in the council halls. "Has anyone actually managed to close a deal with the humans lately?" the Krelith delegate asked at an informal gathering. The room was filled with the sound of diplomatic silence. "We offered them advanced technology transfers," Delegate Minara chimed in. "We offered them massive trade concessions. We even offered to sponsor a brand new membership petition. They just don't answer." "Maybe they finally had that nuclear war they were always talking about and wiped themselves out," someone muttered. It seemed plausible. But they hadn't. Long-range surveillance drones sent to the edge of human space showed a very different picture. Earth was fine. In fact, their colonies were booming, and their ships were zipping around their territory busier than ever. They just weren't talking to anyone else. "This is ridiculous," the Vorthani delegate gurgled during a council session in year 8. "They're acting like spoiled children, like a hatchling who sulks after being denied a sweet grub." High Arbiter Zilvex, the council leader, clicked his mandibles in thought. "They have broken no laws," he noted. "They have made no threats. They have simply chosen not to speak with us." "Then make them speak." "And on what grounds?" Zilvex countered. "The council has no power to force a species to be our friend. We could block their trade routes." "What trade routes? They aren't trading with anyone." "Then threaten them with our fleet." Zilvex's multifaceted eyes seemed to twinkle with something like humor. "Against a species that hasn't made a single hostile move in 8 years? The Council would never authorize such an unprovoked attack. Besides, why bother? They're an insignificant species. Let them have their little sulk in their corner of the galaxy." But even as he spoke the words, Zilvex felt a strange sense of unease. There was something about the human silence that was deeply unsettling. The 10th year brought the crisis that changed everything. The Thresh were a nightmare from the void between galaxies. They swarmed out of the darkness every few thousand years and simply devoured everything they found. You couldn't negotiate with them. You couldn't reason with them. They were a galactic plague. The Council had fought them off before. The combined navies of 400 species had always been enough to drive them back, but the cost was always horrific. This time, it was different. The Thresh had learned. Their weapons, which used to be a problem, now sliced through the Council's best shields like paper. Their ships, once limited in number, now appeared in swarms so dense they blocked out the stars. The first battle was a massacre. 17 Council fleets, the pride of 300 different species, were vaporized in less than a day. The few survivors who escaped brought back terrifying news. Nothing they had could even scratch the enemy. The second battle was even worse. A frantic emergency session was called. Military commanders worked around the clock, desperate to find a weakness, any strategy that might give them a fighting chance. They came up with nothing. The Thresh surged deeper into Council space. 3 capital worlds fell. Their people weren't conquered. They were consumed. Billions of lives were snuffed out in a matter of hours. "We need new ideas," the Council's top general declared, his voice heavy with defeat. "New tactics, new technology, a way of thinking about war that we've never considered." The humans, a quiet voice said from the back of the chamber. Every head in the room turned. The humans, the diplomat repeated, stepping forward. He was from some minor world, someone nobody ever paid attention to. Their entire history is basically one long war. They are creative when it comes to conflict in ways that, frankly, most of us find disturbing. They might see an angle we're missing. A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Everyone remembered the day of laughter. Everyone remembered mocking and dismissing the pathetic little species from the backwater planet. They won't help us, Delegate Minara said flatly. We've been trying to get their attention for years on other matters. They will not respond. This is different. Trillions of lives are on the line. Try again. Offer them everything. Full membership, technology, planets, anything they could possibly want. Maybe this time they'll finally answer. The most desperate message in galactic history was drafted and sent. It laid out the full horror of the Thresh invasion. It practically begged for help. It offered humanity the keys to the kingdom. A short while later, the reply came, acknowledgement of receipt, and nothing more. The Thresh drew ever closer. 5 more worlds were devoured. The shining capital station of the Council itself was now in the path of the swarm. For the first time in 11,000 years, the Galactic Council was facing total and complete extinction. In a final act of desperation, High Arbiter Zilvex decided to do the unthinkable. He would go to Earth himself. His ship warped into human space, alone. He wasn't attacked. He wasn't warned away. A sleek, powerful-looking human warship simply appeared, matching his course and escorting him in total radio silence, guiding his ship into orbit above Earth. Zilvex had never seen the human homeworld. He stared down at the vibrant blue and green globe, at the spiderwebs of city lights on the night side, and felt a sense of awe. A shuttle brought him down to a sprawling complex of elegant buildings overlooking a vast body of water the humans called the Pacific Ocean. He was met by silent guards in sharp uniforms who led him down minimalist but immaculate hallways. At last, he was shown into a large office where a woman sat working behind a large desk. Elena Vasquez had aged. Her hair was now more silver than black, and her face was etched with the lines of command. She was no longer just an ambassador, she was the Secretary General of the entire United Earth Confederacy. The woman who had been laughed out of the Grand Chamber now held the fate of her entire species in her hands. She looked up as Zilvex, the leader of the entire galaxy, entered her office. Her eyes weren't angry or hateful. They were something far more terrifying, completely empty. "Hello, Arbiter," she said, her voice polite but as cold as deep space. "What can I do for you?" Zilx laid it all out. The threat they called the Thresh, the horrific losses, and how desperately they needed a fresh perspective, a new way to fight back before it was too late. He talked for almost an hour, holding nothing back. He admitted their failures, their weaknesses, even their fears, things no arbiter had ever confessed to an outsider. Elena just listened, perfectly still. When he was done, she gave a slow nod. "I see," she said. "That does sound serious." "It is," he pleaded. "Billions have died. Billions more are next if we don't find an answer. We need your help." "I understand," was all she said. The silence that followed was heavy. Zilx waited. He'd come prepared for tough negotiations, for demands and conditions. He had not prepared for this void. "Secretary General," he said, his voice strained, "I'm asking for your help. The entire Galactic Council is asking. What do you want from us in return?" Elena got up and walked over to the window. The sun was dipping below the ocean, bleeding gold and red across the water. She watched it for a long moment. "Arbiter," she said, her voice soft. "Do you remember what happened in the Grand Chamber 15 years ago?" "I remember the session. Your petition was denied." "You laughed at us," she stated, her voice still unnervingly calm. "All 412 species. You laughed so hard the translation system could barely keep up. Then you told us to come back in 1,000 years. Secretary General, surely you wouldn't let an old grudge stop you from saving innocent lives?" It wasn't a grudge, Elena said, turning to face him, her eyes still holding that terrible, chilling emptiness. It was an education. You taught us a very valuable lesson that day. You showed us exactly where we stood in the galaxy, and we listened. We may have been hasty. Perhaps we would welcome humanity's membership now. Full membership, starting today. Elena offered a smile that was all sharp edges and no warmth. High Arbiter, I'm about to tell you something, and I need you to know I am being 100% sincere. She took a step closer. We don't want your membership. We don't want your trade, your tech, or your blessing. We want absolutely nothing from you. His three hearts hammered in his chest. So you'll just stand by and watch billions die? Elena was quiet for a second. When we walked out of that chamber, she said finally, we made a promise to ourselves. We would never again rely on anyone who could look down on us and laugh. We would never again beg for a seat at a table that didn't want us. We spent 15 years building something for ourselves, something that doesn't need your counsel. Building what? He demanded. That is no longer your concern. Elena returned to her desk and touched a control. Your escort is waiting to take you back to your ship. I wish you a safe journey. Zilx was stunned. In 11,000 years, no one had ever said no to the council. Not just to membership or a trade deal, but to the very idea of a conversation. You can't be serious, he stammered. This is madness. We're offering you everything you ever wanted. 15 years too late, she said, picking up a datapad and acting as if the most powerful man in the galaxy wasn't even in the room. Goodbye, High Arbiter. Zilx was led off the planet, wrapped in a deafening silence. As his ship pulled away from Earth's orbit, he stared at the little blue marble. It looked just like it did in the holograms all those years ago. Small, ordinary. But something had fundamentally changed. The humans weren't asking anymore. And somehow, a cold dread creeping through him, Zilx knew. That was far more terrifying than any monster the Thresh could ever be. He returned to the council and reported his failure. The chamber exploded with fury. How dare the humans refuse them? How dare they place their petty pride above the fate of billions? This just proved what they'd said all along. Humans were primitive, selfish, and unworthy. But all their shouting didn't change a thing. The humans stayed silent, and the Thresh kept advancing. In the end, the council barely survived. It took another 3 years, and it cost them 17 entire species, just wiped from existence. 43 worlds were burned to ash. Civilizations that had stood for millennia vanished in a flash. The great alliance that had kept the peace for 11,000 years was left broken, smaller, and deeply humbled. And through it all, humanity did nothing. Their ships would sometimes appear on the edge of a battle, silent watchers who never helped but never interfered. They would rescue survivors from the wreckage, no matter the species, drop them at a neutral port, and then vanish back into the void. They never fired a single shot. They never asked for any payment. But the people they rescued all told a strange story. The human ships were different. They moved in ways that should have been impossible. They would appear out of nowhere and disappear in an instant. Their hulls seemed to shimmer, as if they weren't entirely in our reality. At first, these were dismissed as stories from traumatized victims. Everyone knew human tech was crude, but the reports kept piling up, and they all said the same thing. The humans had changed. No one knew how. No one knew why. But in those 15 years of silence, something had happened. Something that was about to shake the galaxy to its very foundations. The Thresh War finally ended in the 18th year of humanity's silence. The galaxy that was left was a ghost of its former self. Where 412 species once met in the Grand Chamber, only 395 remained. 17 civilizations were gone forever. Their planets were graveyards. Their people, memories. Their entire histories were now just files in the Council archives. 43 more worlds had been annihilated. Billions were dead. Old alliances had cracked under the strain of war. Lifelong friendships were shattered by blame and suspicion. The Galactic Council was still there, but it was just a shadow. Its power was weak, its decisions questioned. Species that once worked together now eyed each other with distrust. And through every bit of it, humanity had remained silent. They hadn't helped, but they hadn't hurt either. They just watched from a distance, saving who they could, but never joining the fight. Their silence became a legend. Some called them cowards, others called them wise, but most just tried not to think about them. The problem was, ignoring humanity was getting harder and harder. The stories from survivors of the war hadn't stopped. In fact, they were getting more specific and more unbelievable. Human ships that defied physics, technology that seemed to operate on pure magic, power readings that were off the charts, higher than anything the Council had ever seen. A top scientist, Chief Technician Aldara, was put on the case. She was a being of pure energy, one of the greatest minds in the galaxy, and she had spent 2 centuries studying the laws of the universe. What she discovered simply didn't make sense. These readings show their ships work on principles we can't even comprehend, she told the science committee. They don't seem to be flying through space. It's more like they're stepping around it, and their energy signatures, they don't match anything in our entire database. How is that possible? The committee chair demanded. 18 years ago, they were using primitive rockets. They were centuries behind us. I don't know how, Aldara pulsed. I only know what the data is telling me. Then the data is wrong, glitches from damaged sensors. Aldara's energy form flared with frustration. I've cross-referenced it over 300 separate incidents. They all say the exact same thing. Either every single survivor of the Thresh War had the same impossible malfunction, or the humans now have technology far beyond anything we can imagine. The committee didn't want to hear it. They voted to label her report unreliable and buried it deep in the archives. But you can't hide from the truth forever. 2 years after the war, a rebellion broke out against the brutal hegemony of 12 stars. This wasn't new. The hegemony was an empire built on fear, and rebellions were common. They were also always crushed. This uprising was on a small world called Valen 4. The people there, the Cathari, were a peaceful species who had been conquered generations ago. They had suffered for centuries, but the losses from the big war were the final straw. They demanded their freedom. The hegemony's response was predictable. They sent a fleet to crush them. 30 massive warships carrying enough firepower to turn Valen 4 into dust. The Cathari had no army. Their choice was simple: surrender or die. But when the fleet arrived, they found human ships were already there. On the flagship's bridge, Commander Thera stared at her screens, unable to believe her eyes. 3 small human ships were hovering in orbit around Valen 4, placing themselves directly between her fleet and the planet. By all logic, they should have been no threat at all, but every one of Thera's instincts was screaming at her that this was very, very wrong. A clear voice cut through the silence on an open channel. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the UEC Endeavour. Imagine being told you're just a neutral observer, there to protect innocent civilians. That was the message sent to Commander Thera. But Thera, a hardened veteran of countless wars, wasn't about to be bossed around by 3 tiny human ships. She saw their presence not as a peacekeeping mission, but as an insult. "Human vessel," she broadcasted, her voice dripping with contempt. "You are trespassing in hegemony space during a military action. Get out now, or we will destroy you." The human reply was calm, steady, and infuriatingly simple. "Negative, Commander. We're staying put." Thera actually paused. The Council had always preached caution with humans, especially during their long silence. "Let them pout," the diplomats would say. "Don't poke the sleeping bear." But this was hegemony turf, their rules. Thera had her orders and her pride was on the line. "All ships," she commanded, a smirk on her face, "target the human vessels. Fire." 30 warships unleashed hell. Blinding plasma lances, swarms of antimatter missiles, and crushing graviton beams, enough firepower to crack a small moon in half, all screamed toward the 3 small ships. And then, the impossible happened. Everything just stopped. The entire onslaught hung silently in the blackness of space, like a storm frozen in time. Every single missile, every bolt of energy just hovered for a second, and then it turned around. The hegemony's own weapons were coming back at them, perfectly reversing their course. In just 13 seconds, 30 warships went completely dark, not blown to pieces, just switched off. As the emergency lights flickered on, Thera felt a wave of relief. Her crew was alive. Their weapon systems were fried. Their engines were dead. Their shields had evaporated. But the ships were intact. They were completely defenseless. Just then, shuttles began pouring out of the 3 human ships. They streamed down to the planet Valen 4 and began evacuating the Cathari civilians. Thousands of people who had been bracing for death were now being gently guided onto transport ships and whisked away to safety. The mighty Hegemony fleet, 30 of the most feared ships in the quadrant, could do nothing but float there and watch. Hours later, once the last civilian was safe, a final message arrived from the humans. The United Earth Confederacy does not want a war with the hegemony of 12 stars. However, we will not sit back and watch while innocent people are harmed. We suggest you find a new way to handle your internal problems. The message was signed, Captain Sarah Chen, UEC Endeavour. And then, just like that, the human ships were gone. They didn't jump to lightspeed or fly away. They simply vanished, as if they were never there at all. Commander Thera sat on her darkened bridge, trying to wrap her mind around what just occurred. Her entire battle group had been neutered in seconds. No one was hurt. The ships weren't even scratched, but every single offensive and defensive system was surgically dismantled. It would take weeks to fix. By then, the Cathari would be long gone, and the humans did it all with just 3 small ships. News of what happened at Valen 4 spread across the galaxy like a shockwave. An emergency session of the Council was called immediately. The Grand Chamber, which once seated 412 species, now only held 395. But the fear in the room was palpable. This was an act of war, boomed Delegate Minara of the Hegemony. They attacked a Hegemony fleet without any provocation. They defended themselves after you attacked them. High Arbiter Zilvex calmly corrected him, his multifaceted eyes blinking with deep concern. And they did so without causing a single casualty. That's not the issue. They have weapons that can do that. Minara's arms flailed wildly. They stopped our weapons in mid-air. They turned them against us. They disabled 30 warships in seconds. How is that even possible? We should have listened to Chief Technician Aldara, someone whispered from the back. A hush fell over the chamber. Everyone remembered that classified report they had all brushed aside as pure fantasy. We need answers, Zilvex finally declared. We need to know what the humans have been creating and how they did it. The Council launched the biggest intelligence operation in its long history. Spy drones skirted the edges of human territory. Agents from a dozen different species were sent to dig up any information they could. Every shred of data on human activity from the last 20 years was put under a microscope, and what they found completely upended everything the Council thought they knew about the galaxy. The humans hadn't been sulking in silence. They had been working. Using methods that the Council's top scientists couldn't even begin to comprehend, humanity had leaped forward thousands of years in technological progress. It was a complete game changer. One day, humanity was struggling with clunky, primitive fusion drives, and the next, they were zipping between stars in the blink of an eye. Their power sources defied the laws of physics as we knew them. Suddenly, they could build things thousands of times faster, and their military might made the entire Galactic Council look like a joke. We think they're manipulating dimensions somehow, the head intelligence analyst stammered, her voice trembling. Their ships aren't entirely in our reality. It's like they can sidestep the real world, and their weapons, they work on principles we can't even begin to grasp. How? Roared Minara. How is this possible? They were a nobody species. The Vorthani delegate, a creature of shimmering gelatin, rippled with what looked like respect. They are human, it stated simply. When they're backed into a corner, they evolve. When you tell them something is impossible, they find a way to do it. We gave them the greatest motivation they could ever ask for. What motivation? Another delegate asked. We gave them a reason to prove us all wrong. The analyst's report kept getting worse. It wasn't just technology. Humanity had also expanded. What used to be a few small colonies around one star had grown into a sprawling network of dozens of worlds. The human population had skyrocketed from 8 billion to nearly 40 billion in just 20 years, and they had been making new friends. While the Council was busy with its own wars and politics, humanity was quietly forging alliances with species outside the Council's influence. Smaller civilizations the Council had deemed unimportant or unworthy. The very same young species that were denied membership for the same reasons humanity had been cast out. The humans had reached out, offering them a partnership of equals instead of a rigid hierarchy. We have confirmed at least 37 species have entered into formal treaties with humanity, the analyst said. Many have received huge technological boosts. Several have seen their own power grow immensely. They're building their own council, Zilvex whispered, his eyes unblinking. It certainly seems that way. The chamber descended into pure chaos. Delegates were shouting, pointing fingers and making wild accusations. Some screamed for an immediate war against the humans. Others pleaded for diplomacy. A few even suggested they should just surrender now. Zilvex let the noise rage for a few minutes before finally calling for silence. "We have a problem," he said, his voice cutting through the remaining chatter. "A very big one. Humanity is now a galactic superpower, and we have absolutely no idea what to do." "Attack them before they attack us," Minara yelled. "With what?" Another shot back. "Did you not see what happened at Valen 4? 3 of their ships embarrassed 30 of our best without even trying. Our top military minds estimate that if humanity wanted to, they could wipe out our combined fleets in less than 24 hours. Then we negotiate, give them anything they ask for." "We've tried that," Zilvex sighed. "They don't want anything from us." "Then what are we supposed to do?" For a long moment, Zilvex was quiet. "We ask nicely," he said at last. "We will send a formal diplomatic team. We will request a meeting. We will treat them with the respect we should have shown them 20 years ago." "And what if they say no?" Zilvex's mandibles clicked softly. "Then we pray that they continue to be as patient and merciful as they have been so far." The diplomatic mission was put together with painstaking care. Every tradition, every courtesy was meticulously followed. The message was sent out into the void. Days turned into weeks. The Council, once the masters of the galaxy, could do nothing but wait. After 2 long months, a reply finally came. It was short and to the point. The United Earth Confederacy had received their request. A meeting would be granted. The time and location would be sent later. The council chamber erupted in celebration, as if they'd just won a major war. They had made contact. The humans were willing to talk. But some of the older, wiser delegates noticed something unsettling that the younger ones missed. The humans hadn't asked for anything in return. They hadn't listed any demands or conditions. They just agreed to meet. And there was something in that simple, calm acceptance that was far more chilling than any open threat. The humans weren't angry. They weren't afraid. They didn't even seem particularly interested. They were just willing to listen. And somehow, that was the most terrifying thing of all. The meeting was set to take place at a station named Haven's Rest, a place that didn't even exist a decade ago, but was now one of the largest structures in the known galaxy. It floated right at the edge of human space, a massive, gleaming hub of docking bays, living quarters, and grand halls built to welcome thousands of different species. It was neutral ground, not council space, not human space. It was a place for everyone, no matter who they were or where they came from. The council delegation showed up with an armada of their most impressive ships, 50 vessels, representing the diplomatic power of 395 species. It was supposed to be a grand display, a reminder that the council was still a force to be reckoned with. As the council delegation gazed upon Haven's Rest, a creeping sense of doubt began to set in. The station was a whirlwind of ceaseless activity. Starships of every imaginable design arrived and departed in a constant, flowing river of traffic. The corridors were a living mosaic, teeming with beings from dozens of species. Intelligence reports had mentioned at least 70 different civilizations trading here, and none of them were part of the council. High Arbiter Zilvex guided his delegation through the station's humming passageways. He carried himself with the profound dignity his title demanded, yet his large, compound eyes darted everywhere, absorbing every detail. Human security personnel observed their procession, polite but with a cool detachment, professional but utterly without warmth. They provided brief answers to questions and escorted the group to their meeting place with an efficiency that bordered on dismissive. The conference room itself was spacious and thoughtfully appointed. Seating had been arranged to accommodate the unique physiology of every species in the council's party, and refreshments suited to each biology were laid out. Every diplomatic courtesy was perfectly observed. The humans were already there, waiting, when the council members filed in. At the head of the human side of the table sat Secretary General Elena Vasquez. She was an old woman now, her hair a shock of pure white and her face a map of deep lines, but her eyes were unchanged from 23 years ago when she'd been escorted from their grand chamber, calm, unreadable, and endlessly patient. Flanking her was Admiral James Okonkwo, the Supreme Commander of the United Earth Confederacy's military forces. He was a powerfully built man with dark skin, graying hair, and an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. On her other side sat Dr. Leo Wei, the chief scientific advisor to the human government, a small, sharp-featured woman who radiated a quiet intensity, as if her mind was perpetually solving problems the rest of them couldn't even perceive. An entire wall of human officers and dignitaries stood behind them. Every single one of them watched the council delegation enter with that same patient, impenetrable gaze. Zilvex settled into the central chair on his side of the table, the other delegates finding their places around him. Once the room was still, he cleared his throat. "Secretary General Vasquez," he started, "thank you for agreeing to this meeting." "High Arbiter," Elena gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "You're the ones who asked for a meeting. We are here to listen." Zilvex had rehearsed this moment for weeks. He had prepared speeches, developed arguments, and crafted offers that represented the absolute pinnacle of what the council could concede, all wrapped in the most delicate diplomatic language imaginable. But looking into Elena's placid eyes, he threw it all away. "We were wrong," he said, the two words cutting through the silence of the chamber. A ripple of shock went through the room. Even his own delegates, who were expecting a masterclass in diplomatic maneuvering, stared at him, stunned. 23 years ago, Zilvex went on, your species came to us. You sought membership in the council. You made your case with a dignity and a hope that was palpable. You didn't ask for special treatment, only for a fair chance to prove your worth. He paused, the soft clicking of his mandibles the only sound. And we laughed at you. 412 species united in a chorus of mockery. We called you too young, too primitive, too fractured. We dismissed every single one of your achievements and all your future potential. He spread his upper limbs wide in a gesture of utter concession. We were arrogant fools. Elena simply watched him, her expression unchanging. In the years that have passed since that day, Zilvex continued, we have observed your progress. Your technology has now surpassed our own in nearly every field. Your network of alliances has grown to include races we deemed insignificant for millennia. Your decisive action at Valenfor showcased military capabilities we simply cannot counter. He bowed his head slightly, a profound gesture of submission that no high arbiter in history had ever offered to a non-council species. The Galactic Council formally invites humanity to become a full member with every right and privilege that entails. We are prepared to offer comprehensive trade pacts, programs for scientific exchange, and mutual defense treaties. Everything we cruelly denied you 23 years ago, we now offer to you freely and without any conditions. He lifted his head, meeting Elena's gaze directly. We are asking you, Secretary General, please. The room was once again plunged into silence. Every being held its breath, waiting for humanity's answer. Elena looked at Zilvex for a long, heavy moment. Then she turned her head to Admiral Okonkwo and Dr. Wei. The three humans shared a look. Not a single word was spoken, yet an entire, complex conversation seemed to unfold between them in just a few seconds. Finally, Elena turned her attention back to the council delegation. 23 years ago, she said, her voice quiet but clear. I stood in your magnificent grand chamber and asked for a seat at your table. I was representing a young race full of excitement and hope. We didn't want anything more than to be a part of something larger than ourselves, to contribute, to belong. She leaned forward, just a fraction, and you laughed at us. The sound echoed for nearly 10 minutes, 412 species, all telling us in one voice that we were worthless. When the laughter finally died down, you told us to go away for 1,000 years and hope we didn't wipe ourselves out in the meantime. Zilvisi's multifaceted eyes blinked rapidly. Secretary General, we understand now that we made a mistake. Alelenena's voice was dangerously calm. Oh, you do. You've come to that conclusion 23 years too late. After we created technology that terrifies you, after we formed an alliance you can't bully, and after we proved we could wipe out your fleets without breaking a sweat, yes, now you see your mistake. She leaned back, a picture of perfect control. The day we walked out of that chamber, humiliated, we made a pact. We would never again rely on anyone who could so easily dismiss us. We would never again beg for a seat at a table hosted by people who only respect fear. But Secretary General, the Council's offer is sincere. We genuinely want humanity as a partner. Oh, I'm sure you do. Now. But what happens when our technological growth slows down? What if our alliance shows a sign of weakness? What happens when we stop being so frightening? Elena shook her head, a slow, deliberate motion. Would you still want us as partners then? Or would we just become amusing little primitives to you all over again? Zilvex had absolutely no answer to that. High Arbiter, Elena said, I'm about to tell you something, and I need you to know that I mean it with every fiber of my being. She rose to her feet, and the other humans stood with her in perfect unison. In the silence you granted us, we built something new. Not just advanced technology or powerful alliances. We built a civilization that judges worth based on character, not on how ancient a species is. We built a community where your value isn't measured by how long you've had faster-than-light travel or whether you've managed to unify your home world. Her gaze swept across the chamber, landing on each of the council delegates. We went out and found the species you ignored, the young civilizations you wrote off, the different cultures you decided weren't worth your time. We offered them a partnership, not a hierarchy. We offered cooperation, not subordination. We showed them respect before they had to build fleets to demand it. Her eyes finally returned to Zilvex. That is the fundamental difference between us, High Arbiter. You waited until we were strong to offer us respect. We believe that every being deserves dignity right from the very start. Zilvex felt a cold dread crystallize in his thorax. So, you refuse our offer. We don't refuse it, she corrected gently. We simply have no need for it. Elena gathered her papers. The Human Concordant already counts 73 species as members. By this time next year, that number will be well over 100. We already have everything we came to you for 23 years ago. Community, partnership, a sense of belonging. We just built it ourselves, with friends who valued us back when we had nothing. Then why did you even agree to this meeting? Zilvex asked, his voice strained. Elena paused at the doorway. For the very first time, a flicker of something that might have been warmth touched her eyes. Because we are not you, she said softly. We are not going to laugh at you. We won't mock you as you decline or find joy in your struggles. We remember exactly how that feels. She turned to face the entire council delegation. The Galactic Council is welcome to send observers to any concordant proceedings. Individual council species are free to apply for membership in the concordant, but know that they will be judged by the exact same standards as every other applicant. And if you ever face a threat like the Thresh again, we will step in to defend innocent lives, no matter their political affiliation. But you will not join the council. No, she said. We will not. Elena's expression was gentle, yet absolutely unyielding. You told us to go develop in peaceful isolation. Well, you got your wish. We developed. We found peace. And we are perfectly content with our isolation from you. She turned and walked out the door, the other humans following her in silence. Zilvex remained frozen in his chair, Around him, the collective diplomatic power of 395 species sat in absolute stunned silence. They had offered humanity the galaxy on a silver platter. Full membership, exclusive trade rights, a military alliance, a formal apology for their past sins, and humanity had just calmly turned and walked away. Again. The long journey back to council space was eerily quiet. The delegates hardly exchanged a word. What was there left to say? They had failed on a scale they couldn't comprehend, not because of a war or a breakdown in negotiations, but because of something far more soul-crushing. Humanity simply didn't care about them anymore. For 11,000 years, the Galactic Council had been the undisputed center of the civilized galaxy. Every species that mattered was either a member or desperately wanted to be. The Council's acceptance was the ultimate prize. Its rejection meant a lonely slide into irrelevance. And now, suddenly, there was another option. A rapidly growing alliance founded on principles the Council had never even bothered to consider. A community that didn't give a damn about how old you were, how advanced your tech was, or whether you ate plants or slept for half the day. And humanity, the species they had laughed out of the room, was at the very heart of it all. Zilvex spent the entire trip home thinking about Elena Vasquez, about the hopeful young woman who had asked for nothing more than a chance, and the powerful old woman she had become, who now held the galaxy's future in her hands. Her eyes held nothing but a deep, unyielding patience. The Council had done this to them. They'd taken a young, hopeful species and slammed them with a brutal lesson in galactic politics. They showed humanity exactly what kind of respect they could expect from the older, established civilizations. And humanity learned that lesson perfectly. They learned that respect wasn't given freely out of kindness. It had to be taken through power. They learned that the strong always dismiss the weak. They learned that ancient history and advanced tech meant more than character or potential. And after learning all that, humanity decided to build something completely different. That's what stung the most, Zilx finally understood. It wasn't that humanity had blown past them in technology. It wasn't that they'd built a rival alliance. It was that they had taken the Council's own cynical lessons and thrown them in the trash. The Council had taught humanity that the strong should mock the weak. So, humanity decided to become strong and still be kind. And now, 23 years too late, the Council was finally discovering what it felt like to be on the other side of that lesson. When the delegation got back to the Council station, they walked into the Grand Chamber to find total chaos. Word of the failed meeting had somehow already gotten out. Different species were yelling at each other. Fingers were being pointed. Some blamed Zilvex for the diplomatic disaster. Others blamed the species who had laughed the loudest 23 years ago. A quiet few blamed the entire Council system itself. Zilvex just watched over the shouting match with a tired sense of defeat. Let them argue. Let them point fingers. It didn't change a thing. Humanity had built something new, something that didn't need the Council's permission slip, something that was growing every day while the Council was shrinking. And there wasn't a single thing any of them could do about it. The era of the Galactic Council was coming to a close. A new age was dawning, and humanity, the very species they had written off as worthless primitives, was going to be right at the center of it. Zilx looked up at this massive crystalline ceiling of the Grand Chamber. 11,000 years of history. 11,000 years of believing they were the heart of the civilized galaxy. All of it was turning to dust because 23 years ago they had laughed at the wrong species, and now it was far, far too late to take it back. 50 years had gone by since the day of laughter on Earth. It was a holiday now. Every single year on that date, humans and their allies would take a moment to remember the day that changed everything. Schools taught the story. Museums had exhibits with artifacts from that time. Elderly humans who remembered watching the Council broadcast as kids told the story to their grandchildren. The galaxy had changed in ways no one could have imagined. The Galactic Council? It still existed, technically. The crystalline towers of the Council station still reached for their artificial sun. Representatives still met in the Grand Chamber to debate and to vote. But that chamber was more than half empty these days. Species had left, not in a big rush, but in a slow, steady trickle over the decades. Some had joined the human concordat outright. Others had just drifted away, no longer seeing any point in being a council member. A few had collapsed completely, unable to keep up with the new galactic order. High Arbiter Zilvex was still in his position. He was ancient now, even for his long-lived species. His shell had grown dull with age, and his movements were slow and deliberate, but his compound eyes still shone with intelligence, and his mind was as sharp as ever. He now presided over a council of 112 species, less than a third of what it had been in its golden age. And today's session was especially humiliating. The motion to request observer status in the human concordat is now on the floor, Zilvex announced. It was the council's 5th time making this request. The last 4 had been politely acknowledged and then completely ignored. No rejection, no acceptance, just silence. It was a political trick humanity had learned from them. The vote passed without a single objection. Of course it did. What other choice did they have? The Concordat now had over 200 member species. Its economy made the councils look tiny. Its technology was generations ahead of theirs. Its core principles of equality and mutual respect were constantly attracting new members. The council was becoming a relic, and everybody knew it. After the session, Zilvex walked alone through the station's corridors. He did this a lot lately, just walking and remembering. He remembered the Grand Chamber in its prime, packed with representatives from 412 species. He remembered the absolute confidence they all felt, the certainty that they were the center of the civilized universe. He remembered laughing at a young human woman who had the nerve to ask for a seat at their table. He wondered, and not for the first time, what might have happened if they had just said yes. If they had welcomed humanity, guided them, given them a chance to prove their worth within the system. Would things be different now? Probably. Almost certainly. But they hadn't done that. They had laughed, and now they were living with the consequences. All the way across the galaxy, on a station named Concordat Prime, a very different kind of meeting was happening. The Human Concordat's annual assembly brought together representatives from 217 species. They came from every corner of the galaxy, young civilizations and ancient ones, massive species and tiny beings made of flesh and energy and silicon and things that were hard to even describe. They didn't meet in some grand chamber designed to intimidate people, but in a simple hall built to be functional and comfortable. There were no raised platforms for the more important species. No seating chart based on age or power. Every single delegate sat at the same level, as equals. Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the entrance to the hall, watching the delegates as they arrived. She was old now, her hair was completely white, and her body showed the wear of decades of service. But she still stood tall, and her eyes were as sharp as ever. She had seen more in her life than most humans could ever dream of. War and peace, tragedy and triumph, and the birth of a whole new galactic order. And through it all, she never forgot how it started. A young Vorthani walked up to her. His name was Trinex, and he was the first of his kind to be born outside of Council space. His parents had been among the first Vorthani to join the Concordat, turning their backs on the Council that had claimed to represent their people for thousands of years. "Admiral Chen," he said, his gelatinous body rippling with respect. "It's an honor to meet you." Sarah smiled. "The honor is all mine, Delegate. Your work on the Integration Committee has been incredible." Trinex rippled with pleasure at the praise. "I learned from the best. Human schools taught me that every voice is important. That's not how the Council raised my parents. Times change. They do. Thanks to your people." Trinex paused for a moment. "Can I ask you something, Admiral?" "Of course." "Is the story true about the Day of Laughter? Did the Council really mock humanity that badly?" Sarah's smile faded just a little. "It's true. I wasn't there in person, but I watched the recording. Eventually, the whole galaxy watched it. It just seems impossible. How could they have been so blind?" Sarah looked out at the assembled delegates, species the Council had ignored, civilizations they had dismissed as worthless. All of them were now working together as equals. "They weren't blind," she said at last. "They were just confident. They had been the center of everything for 11,000 years. They couldn't even imagine that something they did could be wrong. And then you proved them wrong. Not me, Sarah corrected gently, gesturing at the hall. All of us. Everyone who believed that being strong didn't have to mean being cruel. Everyone who decided to build something better instead of just complaining about how things were. Trinex was quiet for a second. What happens to the council now? They've asked for observer status again. I know. Will you grant it this time? Sarah thought about the question. The council had been making these requests for years. Every time the Concordate's leadership had talked it over and decided to wait, not as a punishment, not for revenge, but because observer status actually meant something in the Concordate. It meant a species was ready to learn, ready to grow, and ready to accept new ways of thinking. Was the council really ready for that? That decision isn't just up to me, Sarah said finally. It's up to the entire assembly. But what would you vote? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She thought about all the years of being ignored, the Valen 4 incident, the meetings that went nowhere, the hollow apologies that came decades too late. She thought about Alana Vasquez, who had passed away 10 years ago and was mourned by 100 different species. The woman who had walked out of that grand chamber in silence and spent the rest of her life building something to replace the system that had denied her. What would Elena want? The answer came to her easily. I would vote yes, Sarah said. Not because they deserve it, but because that's who we decided to be. We give everyone a chance, even the ones who laughed at us. Trinex rippled in surprise. Even after everything? Especially after everything, Sarah said, turning to face him. The council taught us that the strong are supposed to mock the weak. We decided to be different. If we start punishing people for not living up to our standards, then we become the very thing we fought against. She looked back at the assembly hall, where delegates from 217 species were taking their seats. Besides, she added quietly, they've suffered enough, having to watch everything they built crumble while we grew. That's punishment enough for anyone. The assembly started a few minutes later. Hundreds of delegates discussed trade deals, scientific projects, and mutual defense pacts. Decisions were made by everyone agreeing, not by simple votes. Arguments were settled through discussion, not by flexing power. Near the end of the session, the issue of the council's observer status was brought up. The debate was short. A few delegates argued against it. Old wounds still hurt for some, but most of them agreed with the position Sarah had shared with Trinex. But they had built their new Concordate on a foundation of inclusion and mutual respect. To turn the council away would be to betray their own core values. So the choice was clear. They would grant them observer status. The council would be welcomed, not as the galactic leaders they used to be, but as newcomers, as students, as a people who, if they were humble enough to learn, might just find their place in the new order of the galaxy. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about punishment. It was simply the Concordate living up to its own ideals and being better. Aboard the council station, High Arbiter Zilvex got the news. He had to read the message 3 separate times, positive he was misunderstanding it. They had actually said yes. After all the pleading, the deafening silence, all the years of being completely ignored, just as his council had once ignored them, humanity had finally said yes. Zilvex didn't know what to feel. There was relief, of course. A tidal wave of it. This was everything the council had hoped for. But there was something else, too. An uncomfortable, creeping feeling that tasted a lot like shame. They were being given a second chance, not because they deserved it, not because they had clawed their way back to power, but simply because the Concordate was generous. The council had rejected humanity for being too young, too weak, too different. The Concordate was now accepting the council in spite of everything they had done. It was the complete opposite of every principle the council had ever held. And somehow, that show of grace made Zilvex feel 100 times worse than if they had just been told no.